Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Kitabun Nadhr, the book of vows. Nadhr in the language means something which is wajib, as in the statement of Allah Jalla wa Ala, ثُمَّ لْيَقْضُوا تَفَثَهُمْ وَلْيُوفُوا نُذُورَهُم. And let them complete their rituals or rites, and let them fulfill their obligatory actions, the nudhur, plural of nadhr, obligatory actions. As for in the technical fiqh sense, it is that a mukallaf, somebody who is baligh and aqil, makes obligatory on himself an action which is not obligatory originally in the Sharia. So he makes out of his own accord an action obligatory on himself. Now the nudhur then are of different types. So number one is a nadhr ta'a, a nadhr you make to perform an act of worship or an act of obedience. And this is obligatory to be fulfilled. The Prophet said authentically, Man nadhara an yuti'a Allah falyuti'. Whoever makes a vow to obey Allah, then let him obey him. So act of ta'ah is an act of obedience by which you draw closer to Allah Jalla wa Ala. The one who does not fulfill this vow, then this is a sign of hypocrisy. Allah Jalla wa Ala says in Surah At-Tawbah, وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ عَاهَدَ اللَّهَ لَإِنْ آتَانَا مِنْ فَضْلِهِ لَنَصَّدَّقَنَّ وَلَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. And from them is the one who makes a contract with Allah that if Allah should give us from His grace, meaning wealth, then we will surely give charity, and we will surely be from the righteous. Then he goes on, فَلَمَّا آتَاهُمْ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ بَخِلُوا بِهِ وَتَوَلَّوْا وَهُمْ مُعْرِضُونَ. But when He gave them from His grace, meaning wealth, they became stingy with it, and they turned away averse. Then he goes on, فَأَعْقَبَهُمْ نِفَاقًا فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ إِلَى يَوْمِ يَلْقَوْنَهُ. So He punished them by putting hypocrisy in their hearts up till the day they meet Him. So an example of another ta'ah would be that I owe to Allah to fast for 1 month. Fasting is a ta'ah, it's an act of obedience, act of worship. So you must fast this 1 month. But it is not desired to take a vow. Allah Jalla wa Ala says in Surah An-Nur, وَأَقْسَمُوا بِاللَّهِ جَهْدَ أَيْمَانِهِمْ لَإِنْ أَمَرْتَهُمْ لَيَخْرُجُنَّ قُلْ لَا تُقْسِمُوا طَاعَةٌ مَعْرُوفَةٌ. They take their severest oath that if you order them, they will go out. Say to them, O Prophet, do not take an oath, because obedience is known. You do not need to take an oath to emphasize that you will work righteousness. Rather, you need to work righteousness without taking an oath. It is known what acts of obedience are. You need not take an oath. Okay, so that's the first type. Then we have the second type, which is the complete opposite. Nadhrul ma'asiyah, when you make a vow to commit an act of sin, and this is obligatory not to be fulfilled. There is just a difference of opinion. Is there a kafara for this or not? The kafara for another will be the same as the kafara for an oath, as we learn from the hadith. We do have a hadith which says that the kafara, if you make a vow of disobedience, is the kafara for an oath. It would be clear-cut, only they dispute as to whether this hadith is authentic or not. And then we have the third type, which is nadhrun mubah, a vow to do an act which is simply permissible. For example, for Allah, upon me there is a vow that I will wear this particular shirt. Wearing a shirt is a permissible matter in and of itself. So this type of nadhr takes the same ruling as if you were to say, Wallahi, I will wear this shirt. You're taking an oath that you will do something in the future. Now here you have a choice. You can go on and complete this vow, or you can break it and give the kafara for the yameen. And then we have the other category, to make a nadhr to do that which is makruh. For example, he makes a vow to eat onions, and yet he has to go to the Salat al-Jama'ah. Now we know if you eat onions or garlic, they give off a smell and you will annoy the congregation. So it is makruh then to eat onions before the Salat al-Jama'ah. So if he takes a vow to do something makruh, then it is better for him not to do it and offer the kafara. And we have the fifth category, nadhrul lijaj wal ghadab. This is a nadhr taken when somebody is angry, or to force somebody to do something, or perhaps try to force somebody not to do something. Or maybe try to force somebody to believe him, or force somebody to disbelieve something. And this takes the ruling of a yameen. For example, he says, if I speak to Zayd, then I will fast for 1 month. He's forcing himself not to speak to Zayd. Or, for example, he tells something to someone and his friend does not believe him. And he says, if I am lying, then upon me is a vow to fast for 1 year. We have to look at his intention. His intention is not the fasting for the year per se, rather his intention is to make his friend believe him. There is a sixth category, which is, he says, for Allah, upon me there is a vow. But he does not say exactly what it is. Is it fasting for a month? Is it giving charity? What is it? He doesn't mention it. So this takes a ruling of an oath which he must give a kafara for. Let's take a look at the first hadith. Sa'd ibn Ubadah asked the Prophet about a vow taken by his mother who had died before fulfilling it. And the Prophet told him, فَقْضِهِ عَنْهَا, fulfill it on her behalf. So we take from this that you're allowed to fulfill a person's vow if they have died. That's easy enough to understand, but a more interesting question is it obligatory? The answer is no, it is not. The evidence is وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. No one who bears burdens shall bear another person's burden. And so a vow taken by another person is his burden or her burden. It is not your burden. So we can say at best it is recommended because of the order of the Prophet in this hadith, as you have just heard. And especially if it is your mother, because this will be from good relationships or birr to your mother. So it is yet more emphasized. However, there's a vital point that if this person who dies before the nadhr becomes binding upon him, then the nadhr does not need to be fulfilled on his behalf. For example, he says, if Allah relieves me of my illness, then I will fast the month of Rabi'ul Awwal. But he dies before Rabi'ul Awwal begins. Do you fast on his behalf? The answer is no. Why? Because the nadhr did not come into effect before his death. How? Because he died before Rabi'ul Awwal. It's the same thing with fasting, the month of Ramadan. Supposing a person falls ill during Ramadan. Now we know you don't have to fast, okay, that's fair enough. But after Ramadan, his illness continues and he dies from this illness. So he never actually recovered. And he missed 1 week of Ramadan because of illness. Do you fast this 1 week on his behalf? The answer is no. Why? Because the obligation on him to make up for the fast, that is then fasting of 1 week, did not come into effect. Why? Because he died before. If your mother or any family member dies whilst they have a nadhr upon them, which they made and they died before fulfilling it, and that nadhr became binding upon them, then can somebody else other than their family member make it up on their behalf? The answer is yes. But before someone does that, he should inform the inheritors of the deceased, because primarily it is the inheritors of the deceased that should make up for the vow. Let us take the next chapter, the chapter of the prohibition of making a vow, and that it does not change anything of the qadr. From Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anh, that the Prophet ﷺ said that the Prophet one day forbade us from making vows, and he said about them, إِنَّهُ لَا يَرُدُّ شَيْئًا وَإِنَّمَا يُسْتَخْرَجُ بِهِ مِنَ الشَّحِيحِ. It does not avert anything, meaning from the qadr or from your fortune. Rather, it only takes out wealth from the stingy one. So the Prophet says that the stingy people are the ones who make a vow. For example, he says, if Allah heals me from this illness, I will give £1,000 of charity. So this person will only give charity if Allah Jalla wa Ala heals him. So he is a shahih, one who is miserly and has avarice. Rather, you should be giving £1,000 in charity anyway. And this making a nadhr is not going to help heal him. If he is going to be healed, he will be healed, a vow or no vow. That's why the Prophet says, إِنَّهُ لَا يَرُدُّ شَيْئًا. It does not avert anything. It only takes out from the stingy, because the stingy will only perform this act of ibadah, be it monetary or otherwise, if Allah Jalla wa Ala does something for him. So it's like he's making a trade with Allah Jalla wa Ala. Rather, you should be doing your righteous actions anyway. Most of the scholars say that this prohibition is lil karaha, meaning to say it is makruh. It is not haram to make a vow. But the other opinion is that it is haram. Because of this hadith, the Prophet has forbidden it. And if he forbids something, the asl is, or the default ruling is that it is haram until you can prove that it is makruh. And the danger is that if we allow people to do this, then they'll only ever work righteousness if they make a nadhr. So if Allah Jalla wa Ala does something for them, they will then perform righteous actions. And this is not the way the Muslim is. And also you fall into this danger where if you do not fulfill your vow, Allah Jalla wa Ala, as you have heard in the ayat in Surah At-Tawbah, could put nifaq in your heart up till the day that you meet Him. So why bother endanger yourself in this way? Righteous actions should be done freely. وَأَقْسَمُوا بِاللَّهِ جَهْدَ أَيْمَانِهِمْ لَإِنْ أَمَرْتَهُمْ لَيَخْرُجُنَّ قُلْ لَا تُقْسِمُوا طَاعَةٌ مَعْرُوفَةٌ. They take the strongest oaths by Allah that if you would order them, they would leave their homes to fight in the way of Allah. Say to them, do not take an oath. This obedience of fighting in the way of Allah is well known. You do not need to be taking any oaths. Let's move to the next chapter, that there is no fulfilling of a vow in disobedience to Allah, nor in that which a servant has no control over or does not own. Let us take this lengthy hadith. Imran ibn Husayn radiallahu anhu reports that the tribe of Thaqif were allies of Banu Uqayl. Thaqif took 2 men from the companions of the Prophet ﷺ as prisoners of war. The companions took 1 man from Bani Uqayl as a prisoner, and they took or captured the camel al-Adba, that is the she-camel of the Prophet. So as for this prisoner from Bani Uqayl, the Prophet came to him and he said to him, what is the matter with you? The prisoner says, why did you capture me, and why did you capture this she-camel? The Prophet replied, we have caught you for the crimes of your allies, Banu Thaqif. The Prophet turned away from him, but the prisoner called him back, and since the Prophet was compassionate and tender-hearted, he returned to the prisoner. The Prophet asked him, what is the matter? And the prisoner said, I am a Muslim. To which the Prophet replied, if you had said this when you were free, you would have gained every success. The Prophet then turned away. The prisoner called him again. The Prophet returned, and he asked, what is the matter with you? The prisoner said, I am hungry, feed me, and I am thirsty, so provide me with drink. And then the Prophet said, this is to satisfy your need. And then what happened was that the 2 of the companions who had been taken prisoner by the tribe of Thaqif were ransomed. The narrator of the hadith says that a woman from the Ansar had been taken prisoner, and also al-Adba was caught. The woman had been tied with ropes. The people were giving rest to their animals in front of their homes. She escaped one night from the bondage and came to the camels. She came to the camel al-Adba because all the other camels rejected her, but al-Adba was docile. She rode upon its back and drove off. The enemies were informed of this and they sought after her, but al-Adba was too fast for them. And this woman vowed to Allah that if Allah saves her, then as a token of gratitude, she will sacrifice this camel for Allah. When she reached Al-Madinah, the people saw her and they said, here is Al-Adba, the she-camel of the Prophet. And the woman said that she has taken a vow that if Allah saves her on this camel, she would sacrifice it. To which the Prophet said, Subhanallah, what an evil reward she gave this camel. She took a vow that if Allah saves her on this camel, she would sacrifice it. And the Prophet went on to say, لا وفاء لنذر في معصية ولا فيما لا يملك العبد. There is no fulfilling of a vow in an act of disobedience, nor in an act which a servant does not possess or has any control over. This narration centers around this camel al-Adba. This is the Prophet's camel, and it has other names as well, al-Jad'a and al-Qaswa and also al-Kharma. These names have been narrated. So we find that the Prophet has captured this person from Banu Uqayl, and they also captured al-Adba, the she-camel. This man asked, why did you capture me? And the Prophet simply replied, it is because of what Thaqif did to my companions. Remember, Thaqif captured 2 of the companions of the Prophet, and Banu Uqayl were the allies of Thaqif. So it is as though Thaqif and Banu Uqayl were one tribe. And even if the Prophet had a covenant with Thaqif because of their treachery in capturing the companions of the Prophet is repaying them the favor by capturing a man from Banu Uqayl, who are the allies of Thaqif. This man says that I have become a Muslim. Yet despite this, the Prophet did not free him from bondage, because even if he does become a Muslim after bondage, he is not freed. The Prophet simply told him that if you had declared your Islam before we took you as prisoner, then you would not have been taken as prisoner. And so this is a rule that we take. If you capture a person who is apparently a kafir, and so you capture him because we judge people by their apparent behavior and image, and then this person says, no, I am a Muslim, after he has been captured, then this does not release him from bondage. Sure, we do treat him as a Muslim, there's no doubt about that. We do not make takfir upon him. However, at the same time, he is not to be released from bondage. The narration says that he was freed in return for the two companions of the Prophet being freed. Remember the two companions being captured by Thaqif. There was a prisoner trade-off. However, this does not mean that this captured man returned to the land of Kufr. Then this narration seems to slightly change the subject from this man being caught to a woman from the Muslims being caught by the enemies, and she escapes their grip riding the camel al-Adba, making the vow that she will sacrifice this camel if Allah Jalla wa Ala delivers her safely to her homeland. And the Prophet did not approve because she did not own this camel. Did this woman make a Nadhr al-Ma'siyah, a vow to do an evil action or disobedience, because she wanted to sacrifice somebody else's camel? Well, here one can argue that it was not a disobedience because the woman did not know of the ruling that you're not allowed to sacrifice somebody else's camel and make a vow to do that, and therefore she is not sinful. It's just afterwards the Prophet explained to her what the ruling is. We can take from the hadith that you do not fulfill a vow of disobedience. But what about a kafara? Well, in the narration the Prophet does not mention anything about a kafara, and this is what most scholars say, that in a vow of disobedience you simply do not fulfill it, but at the same time there is no kafara upon you. Because had there been a kafara, the Prophet would have explained it to the woman, and you're not allowed to delay essential knowledge later than its proper time. Other scholars say that in Nadhr al-Ma'siyah you do offer a kafara due to what has been reported in the Sunan. La nadhra fi ma'siyah wa kaffaratuhu kaffaratu yamin. There is no vow in a disobedience, and its kafara is the kafara of an oath. In Al-Bukhari, however, we find the Prophet says, Man nadhara an yuti' Allah falyuti', wa man nadhara an ya'siyahu fala ya'si. Whoever makes a vow to obey Allah, then let him obey Him, and whoever makes a vow to commit an act of disobedience, then let him not disobey. You find that in Al-Bukhari there is no mention of a kafara. As for the hadith in Sunan Abi Dawud, then this depends on whether it is authentic or not. Those scholars who hold it to be authentic go by it. Those who do not, they will say that there is no authentic evidence for a Nadhr al-Ma'siyah. Also in Al-Bukhari we have another hadith where the Prophet ﷺ was giving a khutbah and he saw a man standing up. He asked, what's the matter with this man? And he was told, هذا أبو إسرائيل. This is Abu Israel. نذر أن يقوم ولا يقعد ولا يستظل ولا يتكلم ويصوم. He has made a vow to stand up and not sit down, and not to seek any shade from the sun, and not to speak, and to fast. The Prophet told the companions, مروه فليتكلم وليستظل وَلْيَقْعُدْ وَلْيُتِمَّ صَوْمَهُ. Order him that he should speak, and he should seek shade, and he should sit down, but he should complete the fasting. And importantly here, the Prophet did not order that he should offer a kafara. Now, here in this interesting hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, this man vowed 4 things. That he will not sit down and continue to stand up, he will not seek shade, he will not speak to anyone, and that he will, however, fast. Now, fasting is a valid act of ibadah, therefore the Prophet ordered him to complete the fast. However, not sitting down and not seeking shade and not speaking, he was doing this as an act of ibadah to Allah Jalla wa Ala. This is a bid'ah. You do not draw closer to Allah Jalla wa Ala with these matters. So the Prophet told him, just ignore all of this. You can break this vow. You do not fulfill it, because you only draw closer to Allah Jalla wa Ala with that which He has permitted and legislated. You do not draw closer to Him with that which you think is a good action. Let's take this next chapter, the one who makes a nadhr to walk to the Kaaba. Anas radiallahu anhu reports that the Prophet saw an old man being dragged by 2 people. They were his 2 sons helping him to walk. The Prophet asked, what's happening? and they told him that he has taken a vow to walk on foot to the Kaaba. To which the Prophet said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَنْ تَعْذِيبِ هَذَا نَفْسَهُ لَغَنِيٌّ. Allah stands not in any need of this punishment which this man has inflicted on his own self. And the Prophet ordered him to ride. So we take from this that if you make a vow in which there is much difficulty on you, then you do not fulfill it, because Allah Jalla wa Ala does not need you punishing yourself, and you will not draw closer to Allah Jalla wa Ala by punishing yourself and bringing about extra hardship which the Sharia has not brought on you. Remember, your body is a trust from Allah Jalla wa Ala, so look after it. What is apparent from the hadith is that the Prophet did not make mention of any kafara on this man, just like the narration of Abu Israel that we quoted from Al-Bukhari. And other scholars will hold that he has to offer a kafara. There's a similar hadith as well in this chapter from Uqba bin Amir. He says, "My sister took a vow that she would walk barefoot to the Kaaba. She asked me to inquire from the Messenger of Allah about this matter, and the Prophet answered the question by saying, لِتَمْشِي وَلْتَرْكَبْ, let her walk but also let her ride." Again, there is no mention of a kafara, so some scholars would say that there is no kafara for such a matter, and others would say that if she, in a case like this, does ride, then she has broken the vow, and upon her is a kafara of a yameen. Let us move to the next chapter about the kafara of a nadhr. From Uqba ibn Amir again, that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Kafaratul nadhr, kafaratul yameen." The kafara of a nadhr is the same as a kafara of an oath. Remember that a vow of an obedience to Allah Jalla wa Ala, there is no kafara in this, you must perform it. As for the other types of nadhr, like a nadhr to do something which is merely permissible, or that which is makruh, or that which is haram according to an opinion, or a nadhr to make somebody believe you, so that would take the same ruling as an oath, then this, if you have not fulfilled it, would incur the kafara of an oath. The kafara we are speaking of is to feed 10 poor people from that which you would normally feed your families, or you could clothe 10 poor people, or you can free a believing servant. And if you cannot manage any of those, then you fast 3 consecutive days. Of course, if you make a nadhr and you do not say what that nadhr is, then that also incurs a kafara. And also, suppose you make a vow of ta'ah and you are unable, for whatever reason, to complete it. This will also incur a kafara. Okay, and another point to note is when the Prophet called the person who takes an oath a shahih, meaning a stingy person or a greedy person, then this is pertaining to the oaths in which he wants something in return from Allah Jalla wa Ala as a trade. But if he takes an oath in which he does not want anything in return from Allah Jalla wa Ala, then that hadith does not apply to such a person, so that it cannot be said that he is a shahih or a greedy person. We may also take from the narration of the woman traveling on the Prophet's camel that a woman is allowed to travel by herself without a mahram if the journey is necessary, because here the woman was escaping from the kuffar. Likewise, if the woman has to make a hijrah from a land of kufr to a land of Islam, she is allowed to travel by herself, because these are necessary journeys. Also notice how they captured Adbah, that is the Prophet's camel. From the Islamic perspective, the kuffar, if they capture the wealth of the Muslimin, do not own it. And this is the Shafi'i madhab, and there is some khilaf on the matter. But rationally, they should not own it because their fighting was unjust, whereas the fight of the Muslimin is just. Now with regards to the nadhr of ma'siyah, then the safer and weightier opinion is that you treat it like an oath and it incurs a kafara. Firstly, due to the generality of this last hadith that we have discussed, it includes all types of vows. And also in the Sunan, we have a marfu' hadith, La nadhra fi ma'siyah wa kafaratuhu kafaratu yamin. There is no nadhr in a disobedience, and its kafara is that of the oath. This has been graded sahih by many scholars, including Shaykh al-Albani, and we will take it as authentic. This is definitely the safer opinion. Now previously we gave 6 categories of the vows. Let us add a 7th one. And this is a strange one, but it's the nadhr al-mustahil, when somebody makes a vow about something which is impossible to do. For example, He says, I take a vow that I will fast yesterday. That's clearly impossible. Yesterday cannot come today. So in a case like this, there is nothing for him to do. We simply say you're talking nonsense. And there is no wafa, fairly obviously, and there is no kafara either. Because there would be no kafara if he were to take an oath and say, Wallahi, I will fast yesterday. We say to him there is no kafara for breaking an oath. The kafara for breaking an oath is something for which you take an oath to do in the future and it is possible to be done. Okay, here's a question. If a person makes a vow to travel to a masjid for ibadah, does he have to fulfill it? The answer is no, unless he makes a vow to go to the 3 sacred masajid. You'll remember the hadith about not tying up the saddle except for 3 masajid. So traveling to those masajid is an act of ibadah. As for any other masjid, then you're not obligated to travel. And you have the right to offer the kafara and not travel. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. What is a nadhr, linguistically and technically? Question number 2. Enumerate 7 types of nadhr with their respective rulings as to whether you fulfill them or give the kafara or what. Question number 3. Is it permissible for a woman to go on a journey without a mahram if the journey is a necessary one? And give the evidence.